And an interesting perspective on that is it's not so much that the value of Bitcoin is going up compared to fiat. What if the value of fiat is going down compared to Bitcoin? What if we flip that narrative over for a second? Does that change things for people that are listening or for you? It changes things for me. And so holding Bitcoin is essentially preparing ourselves for when fiat essentially self-destructs. Then we're not left with nothing. We're left with the superior alternative.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Eric Gilbert-Williams to the podcast. Eric is a Bitcoin advocate, author of Coin Lords, Bitcoin Sovereign World Unleashed, co-founder of Public Board, Objectivist, and mental health activist. Welcome to the Bitcoin Edge, Eric.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate your time, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm really glad that you reached out to me on X. I've been looking at your information and I love what you are doing. So before we get to that, tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to Bitcoin.
Sure. Yeah. The short summary: out of high school in a system that didn't really fit for me, I just felt like something was off, and I didn't feel comfortable with myself. So I left high school very, very early. Went and did my own thing for a little bit, and walked my own path. And that was the first taste of feeling what it's like to be, you could say, self-made or exploring your own path outside of the pre-built confines of the system that we all live in today. And that was something. It was like putting the cat out of the bag. There was no going back. So from there, I got into direct sales. I had an event production company out in Toronto. I produced business events for quite a while, for about 2 years. I did about 12 events for the business community out there. Moved out west to Alberta to start a construction company. Built it up to 60 people. And then in 2017, just through chats with our mutual friend Dave Bradley, I discovered Bitcoin, and that grew in my mind. Some of the things that weren't making sense to me started to all connect. I had discovered Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged throughout the years, and it connected with the Bitcoin philosophy so much. And so I had to pay attention. There was no way to ignore it. I converted my garage into a mining farm, and had all these giant, massive custom exhaust ventilations. I made it a custom fabrication shop. Was importing intake ventilation from around the world that I could find that would be the right volume, and screwing it up and figuring it out and trying it. And that was really fun. I ended up selling that company and sold the house and everything, and just went traveling as a digital nomad for a while. I got into the tech scene in California. I lived out in North Cal for about a year and a half, and had a couple tech startups, one of which is the Public Board. And that really exposed me into scalable technology. And it's a big passion for me now today. And throughout all that, when I was sitting there in the mining farm, I remember just having these random ideas. And I'm a nerd at heart. I love playing Magic the Gathering, and I had I love comic books since I was a little kid. And so I started to have this idea of a comic and started jotting down notes, but never took it seriously. And now it's all sort of come together. So that's a little, short summary of some of my background. And we can go wherever you want to go from there.
Yeah, that's incredible. Did you have an altcoin journey, or because of your background, did you get Bitcoin right away?
I did. I did definitely dive into the shitcoin world with big hopes that there would be something really positive coming out of it. And I don't mean just monetarily. I mean in terms of, I really believe in communities and having people come together to share a vision and build something awesome. And I really thought that I would find more of that in the ecosystem. And I did find a lot of good people. That's true. But in all my journeys going through the different wormholes and rabbit holes of the shitcoin world, I ended up coming out of it calling it the shitcoin world, right? And that's not by accident, right? It's deliberate, and it's not meant to be insulting to some good people that I know that are out there, trying really hard to do something good. It's just that the general ecosystem as a whole, outside of Bitcoin ideology, it really, in most cases, doesn't understand even what Bitcoin's trying to do. And if they don't understand that, and they're trying to build on a similar or related technology, then I think they're really missing the point. And I got really fed up of spending my time there and finding myself, inherently associated with projects that weren't aligned philosophically with where I'm trying to go in my life. I had to. For me, I'm a hands-on guy. I have to feel it. I have to experience it to know. I can read something and it'll make sense, and that's great. But my comprehension comes more from experience. And so, I definitely dove in there and experienced enough, and that's it.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
I think it's
You know,
natural, I think it's
yeah.
natural just to have a curiosity and to wonder and to, how can we say that it's the shitcoin world without understanding it? There's a point where you can just look at a glance now and be like, oh yeah, there's no point to research that further. I don't have to experience it in order to know anymore. And that's totally valid. But like I said, I had hopes, and I can say fully now that I've exhausted every effort that would have been there to continue hanging on to those hopes. And it feels good to be back home with the roots of where it all started.
And part of the problem with that is because I know there are some good technologies, and Solana, for example, is getting quicker and quicker, and is merging with the trading world, and of course meme coins, which is just for fun. But the whole reason that many of them fail is because of the centralization. That's always going to be a problem.
Well, I mean, you're right. It's getting quicker and quicker, but a lot of people don't ask quicker at what? Quicker at launching scams? Quicker at taking people's money? Quicker at giving hopes and dreams to people that are struggling? Quicker at diverging brain talent from away from good projects into watching a chart price to see if maybe they can squeeze out a couple bucks for themselves without actually offering value to the world? Because if we're talking about that sort of quicker, then you're right, it is getting quicker. And I don't think that's good.
Very good point. And that's exactly why you're here today, because you have said that many people have heard of Bitcoin. Very few understand why it exists and what pain it solves and where it leads. So let's first understand, why are you so passionate about this?
So when I grew up, and I'm going to reveal, I kind of wear my heart on a sleeve here. So when I grew up, my parents split up when I was 3 or 5 or something like that. I was really young, whatever it was. And I lived with my mom and would visit my dad on the weekends. And my mom was a school teacher, and she worked really, really hard. She was just the inspiration for me to work as hard as I do today. And I remember she would take night classes, she would work overtime, she would just push and push, and she would stress, and she was just always self-improving to increase, her rate of pay, and ultimately to provide better for us, because when they split, my mom left everything to him, nothing. She left him the car, she left him the furniture and all that stuff, and just really started from scratch because she believed that that was the right thing to do for us to have a new start. So that on the flip side, my dad, he chose a different path, and he saw. And back then I didn't understand what was going on, but every time, and I'll explain it in like the story of how it happened, right? So I remember talking to him, and he would always be upset at someone, and he would always be talking about a big payout from an injury or a payout from a social program, and he would always be excited about some new compensation that he was going to get from somewhere, somehow, some way. And that was where his focus went. And he'd have a little bit of job here, and he'd work for a cash over there, and then he'd get fired over there. And it was never his fault, though. He was always blaming someone else for it. And as I grew up, as my brain developed and I started to get different perspectives, I realized that my mom represented the embodiment of hard work and building a foundation for yourself, and represented that through her work ethic and her integrity. And my dad, and obviously I'm grateful he put me here on this earth, but my dad, went in a different direction. He became what you could say is a leech on the social system. And it sucks if he's listening to this, but it's the truth, and I'm not going to lie, right? He found that he noticed a truth that we're all experiencing right now. And that truth is that we're in a system that hands out money to people who, quote unquote, need it the most. And well, how do we decide? And who decides who needs it the most, and when and where and how much is appropriate? Well, essentially what we end up with is a system where people are incentivized to prove that they need it more than someone else, to prove that their story is worse, to become proficient at explaining why their story is so terrible, and to be effective, the most effective at explaining why people should be giving them money. And that's the government, that's any program that exists out there. And that didn't sit well with me, that my mom is working really hard, my dad is not, and he's the one benefiting from all the tax dollar benefits. Because on top of that, he never paid child support. So he's not supporting me, he's not supporting my mother, he's not supporting us. Meanwhile, my tax dollars are going for my mom over to him. And then I get to hear about how terrible his life is and how horrible it is, and and that never sat well. So obviously I stopped talking to him for a long time and tried, to make amends. But how do you make amends with a conflicting ideology? It doesn't really work. That's a conflicting ideology is the root of world wars, you could say, in many cases. So how do you resolve it on an individual? You don't really resolve it. So none of that sat with me well. And through my when I had the event production company, one of the guys that I brought in to do a speech, he showed me a book that he said he really resonated well with, which was Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. And I don't have a copy of it, but you can kind of see that that's kind of the title, the cover. You could say it's inspired from the statue in front of the Rockefeller Center, and this is actually a movie prop from one of Ayn Rand's other books. So a really important person in my life, and anyone who hasn't read Atlas Shrugged, you'll discover as you read it that this exact topic gets explored about social systems, about wealth distribution, about giving to the needy and taking from those who can produce. And that philosophy presented in Atlas Shrugged, which is called Objectivism, struck a chord with me so deep and clarified to me those decades that I had growing up with my mom and my dad on different ideologies, and it gave me a perspective that I've carried to this day. So it changed everything. Short version. And when I was researching Bitcoin, because when I found Bitcoin, I didn't just buy it randomly. I had to figure out what it is. And the only way to figure it out is to research it. So, talk to people, read books, studied for a few months. And the more I researched it, the more I found that Bitcoin was essentially rooted in this parallel or extension of the philosophy of individual rights, of the individual being able to create, about producers in the world, and about abolishing corruption and getting to the root of a topic. So essentially just truth and objective clarity. And that resonated. And so in the book Atlas Shrugged, there's a world referred to as Galt's Gulch. It's a little, valley where he's creating a new civilization. And this isn't meant to be a spoiler, but you'll see this in any book summary. And in that valley, there's Midas, who's the banker, and there's he essentially there's a currency they have to introduce to function, and they go pure gold standard. Right, they have pure gold standard of 1-to-1, you could say, outside of the corrupt fiat world. That's the dystopian reality of Ayn Rand's universe there, and which is basically what we live in today. And I thought, if Bitcoin invented at the time Ayn Rand wrote that book, I felt like there was a high chance that she would at least consider it as being part of Galt's Gulch. I'm being careful with my wording to be, putting as much respect towards the philosophy and the true intellectuals that are more adept at it than I am. But I'm saying that, and I think that they would agree, that she would at least consider it seriously as potentially being integrated in the Gulch. And whether or not she would or wouldn't, do that, I don't know. But I decided to put it into the comic as the foundational. And so this is the story of why Bitcoin ended up resonating with me so deeply, going all the way back to when I was 3 years old.
Tell us a little bit more about your Bitcoin philosophy. You mentioned some of the philosophies from Atlas Shrugged, and self-responsibility is a big part of what attracted me to Bitcoin also. I really like your story, and I appreciate you telling us that. But what is your Bitcoin philosophy, and how does that align with yours?
Well, so what is my Bitcoin philosophy? Well, it's very much connected with objectivism and the objectivist philosophy, which is essentially rooted in individual rights. That's the foundational right that human has is to our own property, which includes physical and also mental, right? Our own mind. We have the right to think what we want to think, say what we need to say, and build what we want to build, and that we own the products that come from that process. And we can exchange that as a primary source of value for goods and services in the world, whether through a medium of Bitcoin or gold or seashells, or through direct barter. But we own that, and no one else has a right to our mind or to our products or to our body. And so that's a foundation. And that extends into, okay, well, what is the role then of how do we live together in a group? How do we protect those rights? How do we make sure that everyone's individual rights are actually enforced? And when we get to larger volumes of people living together outside of just a family group and outside of a small township and maybe into more of a city, or even a state or a province or a country, it gets a little bit more complex. And there's things that need to be sorted out. It's like, well, I thought that this was what I was doing, but there was another collaborator in the project. So who owns what to what degree? Right. And that's really the world of civil and our court systems. So I believe that there is a function for a efficient court system. There's a need. If you and I partner on a project, how much of it is for each of us? And some of those details need to get sorted out objectively and effectively and enforced, right? Just because I'm on your show doesn't mean I own your show, right? And so somehow that needs to be clarified and enforced. Because if I were to try and say that I own your show because I was on it, you have to say no, and you can either shoot me if I try to, to take it, or ideally we can each go to a central, some sort of a minimalistic central sort of source where we both agree that we're going to adhere to the conclusion that they come to, and that's essentially a judge, right? And a judge will look at all the facts objectively and come to their conclusion, and we need to be able to trust that, or at least have that confidence that, okay, fine, we agree to this, let's do it, and then we have a solution. So that's the first role of government, you could say, is individual one-on-one little complications and disputes. Now, second, let's say that the judge says that you own the show and I own nothing, which is what they would say, obviously. So now let's say that happens, but I disagree with the judge and I try to go and take the show anyways, for however I decide to do it. And it doesn't matter. I'm not going to give examples because it doesn't matter. That's the role now of enforcement at a local internal level. So that's essentially where police come in. And the police would come in and say, look, the individual rights here were ascertained to be in full ownership of Paula, not you, Eric. So you can't proceed. You shall not pass. Right. And that's the role of a properly functioning police system, so that you don't have to hire bodyguards or fill in the blank in order to deal with it yourself. And so that's the second role, you could say, of a properly functioning government in my own perspective. And I think that would reflect objectivist ideology as well. And the third is, okay, well, outside of the individual disputes, there's another country next door, right? Or let's say there's North Korea over there. And North Korea says, well, you know what? We think that Canada's ours. And well, if all of us are running around with pistols, just protecting ourselves from each other, we don't really have the capacity to defend ourselves at a country level to a nuclear threat or to an Air Force invasion or a bomb strike or a drone strike or whatever it happens to be. We don't have that. So there's a function where we all collectively say, you know what, we need to have some sort of defense and we need to have a budget for it. And I'm okay putting X% of my income towards it in whatever tax system ends up in this, ideal scenario, to have a military. So civil, police, military. And that's it. That's the beginning, that's the middle, and that's the end. There's no other function of government in my perspective that I really support. It's very difficult to vote in elections when they come up because no party represents this. This is essentially a pure night watchman, minimalistic state. Like, imagine if 90% of government spending was completely cut out, gone. But if the spend on on courts and police were tripled. So the role of police would be much more clear. The function of it would be much more clear. We would have significantly less taxes that we're paying overall, but we would experience much greater, you could say, protection, or we would be enabled to produce much more effectively. I live downtown, and I end up having to call the police, once a month because there's fights and there's craziness all everywhere. I can't get a policeman out. It takes 10, 15, 20 minutes to come out to a fight. By then the fight's over. Everyone's gone home. No one gets in trouble. And the culprit can go and do it again tomorrow. That's just what happens, right? I got jumped. My lips split wide open, completely blindsided, with no, I was literally drunk as a skunk, staring at my phone, doing nothing. I was minding my own business. I swear to you, just standing straight, just waiting for my Uber, looking down. And I got jumped out of nowhere. And I did capture their license plate as they drove away because they had a car. They kicked the shit out of me and it's gone. And I got the license plate. I got the visual description. They couldn't arrest him. They couldn't arrest him at all. They couldn't do anything. And at the end of the day, The government here ended up sending me $1,500 cash. They paid me. Like, how does this make sense in any stretch of the imagination? The police couldn't do their job because they're bogged down with inefficient processes and policies. There's not enough of them anyways. There could be enough, but the money's going towards other social programs. And like when I had my roofing company, my construction company, I remember grants coming out to help other people start construction companies. And I'm like, wait a second, are you saying that after all this work I did, you're taking my tax dollars so that you can fund my competition? Is that what you're doing right now? Is that what's happening? And the answer is yes, that's what was happening. Anyway, so I think I've painted a little bit of a picture of some of the frustrations, and the point is, night watchman state. That's the function to me of government, the proper function of it, to protect our individual rights and to allow us to, produce more value to the world that we can all benefit from. And how can we do that if inflation is destroying everything around us? And how can we do that if government is sucking out my tax dollars and giving it to competitions to make my life even harder? And how can we do that when there's a system that's essentially encouraging people to beg, like they did, like my dad was doing, right? It's taking potentially strong brain test. He's really good at begging out of the system. He's amazing at it. How productive would he be if he was actually working towards a productive company, if he was a contributor in a real company, if the incentive was greater to be part of that company and than it was for him to just watch TV and work the system? So I think we would look at a very different world, in a stronger world, one that embraced the foundational principles of Bitcoin ideology and objectivism combined. And that's my perspective. I'm open to debate on it.
Well, I'm not going to debate you on that. I happen to agree. I know you just went to the conference and saw Seb Bunny, and I've spoken to him twice. Everything is downstream of money, and I really believe that. If we have a sound money system and a Bitcoin standard, our world would be a much better place, and we would fix a lot of the incentives. But I want to go back to what you said about most people don't understand why it exists, and why don't most people see the problem?
If I put it in a simple, the turkey principle. Have you heard of the turkey principle before?
I don't think so.
Imagine that we're all turkeys on a farm, and we wake up and there's food that's been left to us by the farmer in a nice little dish that the farmer put there, in a beautiful little hen that the farmer created for us to protect us from the ice and the hail and the wind and the rain and all that, protected by a big enclosure that the farmer made for us so that the wolves don't eat us. Life is good as a turkey at the farm. You even got a dog running around that protects you from other things, and sometimes the farmer's grandchildren come out and pet you and chase you around and get your exercise and have some fun. Turkey's got it great. Then one day, turkey wakes up, sees the happy farmer come towards it, grab it by the neck, chop the neck off, peel the feathers, put you on a plate, and serve you for Thanksgiving as a beautiful turkey dinner. The turkey thought that it was safe. The turkey looked at the immediate surroundings. It's like, oh, free food. Oh, this is great. Oh, friendly this. Oh, happy that. But meanwhile, the turkey was living in an environment that was about to implode. And it didn't have the wherewithal to look beyond getting free food handed to it in order to make a critical decision for its own survival, or to at least understand where it's at. Why don't people understand what's going on? Why don't they look at it? Why don't they ask? They're happy as they are. People are happy thinking that everything's fine. It's a lot less scary to be alive if we believe that everything is fine right now. It's a lot easier to go about our day tackling small problems like what color t-shirt should I wear, or who to go on a date with, or what do you think of that movie? Those are fun little simple things to deal with, instead of, oh my God, is our species on a self-destruct system? And where does that lead? How do we go? Imagine I go on a first date and I say, hey, you know what? And she's like, hey, what were you doing today? I say, oh, I was considering how we're on a self-destruct system and trying to think if we have a chance or not. That's kind of a mood killer, right? So it's inconvenient to open our eyes. And that's, of course, the blue pill, red pill, in a nutshell. So I don't think many people want to take, that deep dive into reality as it is. And even if they do, maybe they're not mentally equipped, or they would rather not, or they want to leave it to someone else. And, that's fine, right? I think that if a person is being, at least that they can acknowledge that there's a problem that needs to be settled. if they can at least acknowledge it, that's the starting point. But most don't even do that. And the simplest example I had was I go in this Uber, and the Uber driver, asks me, what do I do? And I say, oh, I do some stuff with Bitcoin. I got this comic book and da da da. And he says, oh, Bitcoin. When do you think the price is going up? And I was like, well, it was, a 20-minute drive to the airport. So I had some time. And I said, well, it's not really about the price going up, because, when Bitcoin achieves its end goal, there's no real currency to compare it to. It's not about the price of Bitcoin compared to a currency. It's more like a currency compared to Bitcoin, if there is another currency at all, which, maybe there will be, maybe there won't be. But when Bitcoin is the prime, we're not buying and selling Bitcoin like a stock to make more stinky fiat money. That's not the purpose. We're like, Bitcoin becomes the currency, or at least the storage of value that it's all based on. So it's not about accumulating more Canadian dollars or US dollars. And so the Uber driver thought for a second, and he went back to driving, and he said, then he looks back into the rearview mirror and he goes, so yeah, but like, when's the price going up? He wasn't ready. He's just not ready to do that. And for him, in his world, with all due respect to him, was in his world, it's more important to him today to make a few bucks on a chart going up, number go up in terms of fiat gain. That's more important to him than the greater picture. And if everyone thought the way the Uber driver did, then we're doomed. Like, our species is doomed. But when people like you run the show like you're running, and people like at the Bitcoin Rodeo here in Calgary are having the conversations that we're having, we start to increase that awareness, and people start to ask that question, and we start to become a gravity force, a magnet towards other people that are curious to explore and would like to understand and would like to grow with us and like to contribute in their own way. And hopefully there's more powerful people coming than we've ever seen. And hopefully they're on their way right now.
Yeah, I think they are. And I have to admit, I came for number go up. And then I stayed and learned, and I realized, yeah, that's not the goal. But many Bitcoiners still believe Bitcoin and fiat will coexist. How did you get to the point where you believe Bitcoin is the only way forward?
Well, I think it's a consequence of just reality, right? When we were on the gold standard, I mean, obviously I wasn't alive for that. If we stayed on the gold standard, there's an argument to say that maybe Bitcoin possibly never would have been invented, and we wouldn't even be having to have this conversation. But of course, then we evolved to Bretton Woods, then there was a Nixon shock, and then we ended up completely untied to anything. And that created a demand, right? When you shift something on supply, then you create a demand for something, and there ended up being a demand by some people. And I think we should all be grateful that those people took action. That some people, through the cyberpunk mailing list, decided to start experimenting and push through a few experiments and make some progress and learn and grow and pay it forward and ultimately come to Bitcoin. And so, to me, when I look at our history as a species over the past 150 years in our monetary systems, and how that evolution has transpired into where we are right now, considering some of the big bill that's going through right now in the States, it just seems like a natural conclusion to say that no, we actually do need Bitcoin now. We didn't need it before, but we need it now. Now that there's no other system to give a base standard of what do you call that? Just a foundational break even, a standard needs to be set somehow of what we can spend, what we can't, what government can spend and can't spend, and where the limits of government are, and that doesn't exist right now at all. So how else do we get there? Maybe everyone goes back to the gold standard. Probably not. Right now, developing the foundational community, which is the Bitcoiner community, is what I see as the best effort. I don't know that we're ever going to have the existing bipartisan, political system move towards Bitcoin or gold. I think it's an engine that has too much momentum. It's a huge locomotive train it's going downhill, and the brakes are worn out, and it's getting momentum faster and faster. And we're not going to change that. But the moment that all of us start standing up and believing in a different system and using a different system and transferring our wealth over to it and interacting with it, then we're creating a new supply, a new solution inherently without needing to fight with anyone. Like if everyone in the world stood up right now and said, no more corruption, we would see a different result than what we get tomorrow morning when we actually wake up. But that's not how it goes. There's only small pockets, and you see a riot here or a protest over there or a campaign over there, but it doesn't actually affect change. So I think that our time is probably better spent just building a new community, a new ecosystem, and finding people that relate, kind of like the SAT market that Ben runs from BTC Sessions here in Calgary. We got the SAT market. We got dozens of vendors and hundreds of people coming in and buying and selling only with Bitcoin and using Satoshis as the standard of value without any reference to a fiat price. If there's another way, I'm wide open to it. I want to see us get to a productive, sustainable level of operation as a species with the least amount of harm and damage to anyone. That's, I think, the right way to do it. We want to find the most efficient way. And if someone has an idea that doesn't involve a complete makeover, let's hear it.
Yeah, and I think going back to the gold standard, that worked in the past, but now we're in a digital world and Bitcoin just makes much more sense. Plus, we can always dig up more gold, whereas Bitcoin, we have only 21 million, and it's just a better way for the future. Gold is the past, I believe.
Yeah, and there's a few different branches that it goes into, and people have different perspectives, of course. But I think one thing that pretty much all humans can agree on is that we want to survive as a species. We want to be happy. We want our children to be happy, and we want to be, having a good life to some degree somehow. And if we can at least align on that, then we can start to explore what's the best way to get there. And there's a saying that's one of my friends always goes around saying, and he says, there's two types of Bitcoiners. There's Bitcoiners, and then there's people that are about to become Bitcoiners. And so I think that we can be gentle with helping people understand how, yes, you and I both want to have a good world that we both live in. And now it's about how do we get there most effectively. And I think we can help bridge a lot of people over from old thinking into new thinking. And your show is a big part of that movement.
Well, thank you. And you just mentioned about Bitcoin being a medium of exchange as well as a store of value, and how important that is to help the Bitcoin network move forward, because it has to become a medium of exchange in order to succeed. Is that something that you agree with?
Yeah, I mean, how about this? If we don't agree that Bitcoin is needed as a medium exchange, where do we end up? Right? We end up with what? We end up with fiat. We end up with having philosophical debates or voting for the least worst candidate and maintaining status quo to the largest degree. So it's like process of elimination. Well, if everything remains as it is, and we don't look at Bitcoin as potentially a solution to corruption and excess spending and a curb to inflation, if we don't consider that at all, what other options do we have? And personally, I don't see many options that exist right now that would solve that. Now, a deep socialist would say, "Oh, well, we'll stimulate the economy and we'll fund some great projects and we'll give great people the resources they need to produce value so strong that it's going to counteract everything." And it's like, well, but that's the exact same thinking that got us here, right? And Einstein's definition of insanity is to, do the same action over and over and expect a different outcome. But the socialists, that's their only card. That's their only card. It's trust them to redistribute capital to people that they choose in a wishful hope that things will get better. And maybe things get better for a year or 2 years or 3 years. And even that's debatable. But typically, historically, if you go the past 60 years and look at inflation and the effects that has on everyone, the answer is no. That system of thinking is flawed. And they'll be the first to blame capitalism and scream against it. They will, obviously. And they'll present arguments that seem logical if you don't actually dig beneath the surface. But we got to ask ourselves, well, what is capitalism? And is the example that they're providing actually capitalistic in nature? And does the scenario they paint consider what a capitalistic world truly looks like, or an objectivist world looks like? And the answer is usually no. But if you have a loud voice in a nice suit, and they speak with confidence, and they have a good degree behind them, and 100 people agree with them, and they look down at you and they say, "Hey, are you stupid if you don't understand this? Like, don't you understand? You stop trying to figure it out on your own. Just trust the experts." It's really easy for the average person to buckle under that environment and say, "Oh, okay, maybe they're right," and then just vote for them, right?
Yeah, I really love your explanation there. It makes really good points about why, if we go back to that system, we're still expecting different results. The reason that many people still don't get it is because we're so conditioned to believe that this is the only way. I just look at some of my family and friends that think things are pretty good and blame a lot of other things for their problems, but not the money. And I think that's why I want to get to your comic book, which you wrote, which is Coin Lords. Tell us about why you chose to get your message across in a comic book and teach about Bitcoin.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a couple things, and this is obviously the issue. We just printed it. It went for sale for the first time at the Bitcoin Rodeo just 3 days ago now. It's incredible, and it was a lot of fun. And it started just as a fun little side project because I'm a super nerd, like I said, when I was doing mining and jotting down notes. And last year I thought, you know what, let's just get it to print. And if all I do is get it to print, I'm happy. It's good. So as my mind does, it just keeps going, and it started to develop this universe, and it's founded on, like, imagine in the future where Bitcoin achieves its end goal, and Bitcoin becomes the primary reserve of value, and potentially a currency that people use for exchanging value and production, for whatever they're producing. What does that mean? Well, corruption is abolished, and free minds are essentially liberated to produce value like they've never done before. And that's a blend of objectivist philosophy combined with Bitcoiner theory and the practical implementation of what happens when inflation is gone, um, and 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 the individual is no longer suppressed to continue exploring their own paths. And so that affects a lot of different things. First of all, AI is expanding everything right now, and everything it touches goes faster, including things like protein folding. Right? Anyone that looks into protein folding technology, you'll see that we can now take those amino acids and reproduce proteins in a way that essentially screen prints skin cells and cartilage that is like a 90 something percent match to anyone's DNA. And as that technology evolves, enhanced by AI, we can start to repair organs and repair sensitive tissues and bone structures. And maybe in 30 years, we're looking at the average human lifespan of 100 years plus. So where does that put us in 2, 3, 400 years? Are we looking at 200-300-year-old humans as well? And does that mean that a productive mind that might maybe peaked at age 40 to 55, is that maybe only the beginning? Imagine if Einstein was still alive today, talking with Stephen Hawking about where we could go next, and having a board meeting with Elon Musk all in the same room. Like where would we be? And that's sci-fi today, but it's reality on how things are progressing. And similarly, if and of course, this is under the assumption that inflation doesn't destroy them all and send us into global poverty, right? And it also assumes that government intervention doesn't fund a dumb project and we end up with like a Dr. Stadler from Atlas Shrugged that destroys everything, right? So again, we have to be on a primal currency that removes from the equation the opportunity to corrupt or to spend or to extract. That has to be all gone, and that's the foundation. So then we look at what happens with becoming an interplanetary species. Like, we're probably going to be living in Mars in the next, 1 or 2 decades? We'll see. But what happens from there? And when AI helps us understand better technologies to propel our shuttles to greater distances in a safer way and be able to transport materials. And then we look at, let's say, nanotechnology and quantum mechanics. And all of a sudden, in 1, 2, 3, 400 years, we can start to build structures in hours or minutes, which would normally take decades. And we can send a shuttle with nanotechs and nanobots to just extract minerals from whatever planet we want to look at and build those structures and create whatever systems we need so that when the humans arrive, the city's already there, right? So if we're living if our population growth is booming today and the average lifespan is expanding as it is today, and our technology is expanding so rapidly as it is, and AI is accelerating all of it, well, in 1,000 years, maybe we have 200 planets that are populated, and that's that's the exploration here. So everything I just said, that's the foundational that's the foundation of the universe that I've created with coin lords. Now, when we have 200 planets that are populated and we're looking 1,000 years in the future, some of those planets are going to develop their own systems and kind of lean towards their own tendencies, and some of them are going to lean really hard into objectivist and individualist philosophies, and some of them might stray to the other side, stray to the dark side, you could say, because when they're on their own, maybe some corrupt individuals have the capacity to persuade people to go a different path, and that spirals and spirals. So this comic embodies obviously a lot of Ayn Rand objectivism philosophy in the way that I understand it. And it also embodies a lot of, you could say, pulls from V for Vendetta and Alan Moore's work in that regard. And there's also a dystopian contrast of, look, here's what happens if we don't. So here's a planet that went full George Orwell 1984, theoretically, like inspired by that setting. And where that goes from there is obviously not a place that any of us want to live in. And so the worlds explore all that. So and then I take a lot of real world events. So these two girls here are twins, and they were born on planet Gox, and planet Gox was invaded by the Hooded Ones, and their planet was destroyed. So the real world hack of Mount Gox is reflected inside the storyline as a real world event that happened. And then this one here, she was rescued by the miners, and the miners live on a different sort of ecosystem, you could say. One of the planets they live on is covered in ice. And so they bore right down to the core, the center of that planet, and developed a tunnel system and installed all their miners in there to borrow the cold air of the planet to keep it all, in balance. And the heat from the miners ended up melting the ice on the surface to be water, and essentially created a thriving ecosystem. So we got this, where does this go? Like, what does Bitcoin look like, and how does Bitcoin interact, and how does our species look like when all this technology becomes true in the future? And I've done my best to reflect some of that thought into the storyline, as well as providing the dystopian contrast, while also embedding real world characters and real world events from today in it. So like, we could have a character, named Paula, or like, Sergeant Paula in the Nakamoto army that lives on planet Satoshi. We can play with that and understand, like, what does that mean? Or maybe you have a media broadcasting role on the intergalactic news channels that people are looking to as a source of, truth. I'm trying to involve as many people from the ecosystem today into the storyline right now, so that it represents not just what's in my mind, but it represents what's actually going on. And some of that will be contrasting and conflicting opinions. There was an amazing developer I bumped into that's working on the Bitcoin network right now, and he didn't agree with some of the things that I had said. And I said, well, this is great. Thank you for not agreeing. I want to incorporate your perspective to the storyline so that we get all the different angles. Otherwise, there's no other way to get a real, authentic snapshot of where we're at today. So that's in a nutshell where the story's at. And it's more than a comic now. We're building the pilot to go into Amazon or Netflix as a TV series. And if we're successful here, we'd like to be one of the, or if not the first true Bitcoiner show that hits the mainstream media and represents what I hope will be the correct foundations rooted in philosophy and ideology. And that'll be with the support of everyone here. So we got the comic, we launched it. We have an 8-minute teaser that's up, and you can see like the animated pedals and get a mood setter. And now we're trying to build that TV show. And if we hit that TV show status, if we can imagine like going to the movies with your friends, not to watch some random drama or horror, but actually to watch a Bitcoiner, sci-fi entertainment thriller, like, people start to pay attention, and we can start to sway public opinion in a different way and reach people that we normally wouldn't have been able to reach, and instill thoughts and ideas that a lot of people still haven't fully absorbed. They get into Bitcoin for money, and they go see a Bitcoin show, and they're like, oh, there's more than that to it. That's what makes me really, I would love to see people, have that reaction.
Oh, that's amazing. And I can see you have a really incredible imagination. And I really do see it as a TV show or a movie one day that does reach many people. Tell me a little bit about how Bitcoin comes into the story, and how people will realize that Bitcoin is going to improve the world?
So the start is to imagine what the world looks like after Bitcoin's successful, which essentially paints a utopian reality, you could say. I chose everyone's familiar with the cyberpunk sort of environment. It's it's rustic, it's futuristic, there's technology, there's cyborg parts, but it's also lawless and ruthless, and everyone's fighting, and there's starvation everywhere, and there's no green, there's no water, or like trees. So no one really wants to live. I'm gonna make an assumption. No one really wants to live in a cyberpunk world. It's rough and dirty. The solar punk world, on the other side, is a little bit different, something that's more harmonious with nature, and a place that we might want to raise children and be happy in. And one of my favorite examples of a solar punk sort of environment is like Wakanda from Marvel. And you see in Wakanda, they have this harmony with the earth, and they have the most advanced technology on the planet, combined with living in caves and working with waterfalls and being with nature. And that, to me, on my personal perspective, is what I see as utopia, is having the most advanced technology in a sustainable, beautiful planet and living area. So that's what I've called Planet Satoshi in the novel, in the comic, I should say. And so Planet Satoshi is this haven of beauty in the universe. It's where free minds can go to be free and to create and to enjoy their lives, knowing that their individual rights are protected and not having to deal with inflation, and that productivity that they contribute compounds into just the most peaceful environment possible. Now, similar to what I said before, in a night watchman state, there still needs to be some sort of dispute resolution and protection and all that. And part of the role of the Nakamoto army on Planet Satoshi is to look for other free minds and help them, give them a chance to come live here if they want, because it's very, very similar to Galt's Gulch in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, where they look for the free minds and offer them to come in, and very similar to V for Vendetta's interactions with Evie. He can't bring Evie in to the fold unless or until Evie goes and frees her mind, and she has to free it on her own will, in her own way, and her own choice, and it's difficult. So now, if we look at today's technology, we know that a brain does emit brain waves. There are, frequencies that emit from a brain, and there are specific sensors that can pick up on those waves. So we have to take a leap with me, and let's say, is it possible? Is it likely that a brain, a human that has come to a state of EV where she's freed her mind, a state of V where he's freed his mind, that brain is going to emit a slightly different brainwave than a brain that's like a authoritarian style controlling brainwave? It's probably going to be a bit different. So in this world, on Planet Satoshi, the Nakamoto army has developed technology to sense those brainwaves at great distances, galaxy-wide distances. And so when a brain finally does choose to become free, that it triggers a sensor and an alarm at the headquarters of Nakamoto army that there is another one that's become free. And then they can go and have a look and see the environment, see what's going on. And if they're in crisis, if they're in danger and about to be killed, then they can come in and protect that person's individual rights. And that's what happens in the story. We start in sort of a prison environment where we have a free mind that's stuck in well, he's not free yet, but he's in prison. He's about to become free. And then he does free his mind. And then once he becomes free, the Nakamoto army comes out and gives him, first of all, they protected his individual rights by preventing him from dying. And then they give him a choice. You can go back to where you were as you like, or you can join us and, we can train you. And it's up to him. It doesn't matter. And some people will choose to stay and some people won't. So anyways, I'm kind of rambling here, and I apologize for that. I get excited. But that's the foundations of the story. And I'm trying to show people what a world of individual rights could look like. What a world free from corruption, free from inflation, where the most productive minds are liberated to produce in greater capacities looks like, and how that trickles down into other environments and different scenarios. So there are a lot of different worlds, a lot of different characters to explore, a lot of real world scenarios to represent and reflect, and that'll be covered through future issues and future TV episodes.
I'm really glad that you explained that. I definitely want to read it for one, and we'll post links below for people where they can get it. But I was just thinking when you were sharing, I love that you say it's almost like people are opting in, freeing their mind, because when we come to Bitcoin, we have to do that too. Bitcoin is an opting in to another system, and it's also a almost a changing of our mind in order to see that we have been told a lie for many, many years, well, our whole life, and that there is another way. So I really like that. Everybody is welcome to Bitcoin, but Bitcoiners seem to think in a little bit different way, at least the more early adopters. And I don't know if that's true, but V for Vendetta always spoke to me. I'm like, that makes sense. There's something wrong here. And like you mentioned, Atlas Shrugged and 1984 and many of those movies, it's not happening in that way in the world right now, but some of it is. And people who get Bitcoin seem to at least question that. And then it comes a little bit quicker to them. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think once a person starts to ask questions, it leads to more questions. And it's the first action that's the most important. It's the choice to think. It's the choice to choose. Right? Because I can go about my life essentially choosing very little. I could just get a basic job, live in that environment, follow the system that, my parents or grandparents or that was taught to me in school. And I don't really have to think a whole lot. And I don't have to make difficult choices either. So I think as soon as a person reaches a point in their life where they are willing to think more broadly than what's been presented to them in a nice little pretty little box, then I think that what they see is another reason to ask another question. And then when they find after asking that question, brings up an opportunity to ask another question. And some people don't make it all the way, or some people have big gaps of time between one question and the next question, or some people just go rapid fire. And once the doors open, it's like dominoes. And it goes question, 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 question. Whoa, hey, wait a second. Right. So it starts with the person has to be willing to ask that question and to have that curiosity. And I'm going to throw in that it takes a lot of courage as well to explore it. Like if the Uber driver I was mentioning, for him, if I presented to him that his future generations might not have a planet to live on, that would possibly, if we don't change something, that would possibly instill a lot of fear, and it would affect a lot of things in his life. And some people feel powerless to make change. We might feel too small. So it can be scary to ask these questions and to explore objectively with intellectual honesty some of the challenges we're really facing on a global level. And so it does take courage to go down that path and to continue exploring despite the fear, to continue asking questions in spite the fear. And that's that's what Cypher, I think his name is Cypher from Matrix, failed to do. He had enough. He lost that courage. The fear was too big. The hopelessness was too big, and went back and chose the other pill. So it's not for everyone, but I think it does take a lot of courage to continue asking questions and to continue maintaining and feeding that fire of curiosity and kindling it all the time. It's a process that never ends, right? I'm just at the beginning of my journey too, you could say. There's so much more that we all have to create together and to ask and explore together.
Yeah, and that's why we often talk about the ego versus the IQ journey. Do you think it's more of an ego journey?
Well, tell me your definition of ego, because there's a few floating around there. I want to make sure that I'm using the right definition that you are.
Oh, I studied psychology, but I have no
Oh,
idea what I'm going to say right now. Yeah, yeah. Nobody's ever asked me that. But when I say it in this way, just that our ego doesn't want to be wrong about that we were wrong about inflation, that we were wrong about the system that we're living in. And in order to get Bitcoin, you almost have to say, okay, we weren't being told the truth, and I can see that now. And I also bought into that. So my ego in that way.
okay, gotcha. And for me, I define ego as learned behavior, and its prime function is to keep us safe. So I look at everything that I've experienced in my past and compile it in a way that I think would keep me safe. And if the ego had full control over all my actions, I would stay in my room and never go outside because there's dangerous threats of crossing the street. And so what I if the information that I've been living by is challenged, and the opportunity is presented to like shake it, then the ego could scream, no, 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 we have to maintain, like we know what we're doing, and we have to know what we're doing, because if we don't know what we're doing, then maybe we're actually walking into more danger than we realize. Maybe we're the turkey on the farm. And that's a scary prospect. So the ego is going to, prevent us from exploring and prevent us from thinking outside the box. But if we say that the ego's function is to keep us actually safe, then this is, again, the job of courage, is to explore, okay, well, let's actually consider, what does it look like, what are we missing right now, and how can we integrate that? So repeat your question. Now that we have like our ego chat, can you tell me your question again? You said, is it the role of ego or the IQ? Can you rephrase that?
Yeah. So is Bitcoin an ego journey or an IQ journey for most people?
Both seems like a reasonable answer. We have to battle what we've learned using our own intellect and our observations from around us to piece together what is, and just put a period there. So I think that you can't really have one without the other. The ego is a part of us, for better or worse, in control of us or to serve us one way or another, however we want to psychoanalyze that. Ego is a part of us. And IQ essentially represents our brain power and our rational mind. And so I don't know how we could explore a topic without using the rational components of our mind. So I think both are equally present, or to some degree, both present.
Great answer. Kind of a trick question to see. No, no, but you're absolutely right. And I love that you explain the ego in what I would call a gentle way. It's just protecting us. So I really like that. And the next thing then would be, do you think Bitcoin can be used as a spiritual tool?
Spiritual tool. Well, then we get to explore, what does spiritual mean in that context, because it can mean a lot of things, So if I could ask, how do you mean by spiritual? What's your context of spiritual in this particular question?
Spiritual to me means giving deeper meaning to my life and a connection to something bigger than myself. And I know Bitcoin itself is not spiritual just by itself, but when I adopted Bitcoin, I now had more time to look inwards, to think about what I really wanted to do. I stopped doing my real estate job so much because I wasn't loving it. I'm like, my time is now valuable. I'm going to start a podcast and talk to people that I want to talk to. Yes, I still need to make some money, and I still do that with people that I want to work with. But Bitcoin enabled me to do that.
And to me, the story you just described represents, you're more in touch with yourself than maybe you ever have been. And so and I think that that's the representation of adding more meaning into life, right? Like you made a choice to explore your own thought processes, to look at your surroundings with a clearer lens. You had the courage to continue walking down that road. And what it sounds like is you're living a better version of yourself now, and it's more authentic and more in harmony with what you believe. And you even have more clarity on what you believe in the first place. So if that represents spirituality, which it sounds like it does, then I would say that Bitcoin probably had a very positive impact on your own spirituality. And I would say that the same applies for me as well. Going from not understanding what was going around in the world and being frustrated about a lot of different things, into finding my own creativity and finding my own path and finding my own integrity, and being able to reflect it into a passion project that I think is just really fun to do. So I would say that Bitcoin has had a positive impact on my own personal spirituality, if we're using that context for spirituality. And naturally, it sounds like it's given a deeper meaning to both of our lives. And I wouldn't so much say that it has given more meaning to our lives. I would say that I've found more meaning in my own life, and Bitcoin contributed to that journey. And there's a lot of different paths to spirituality, of course, and I always am careful, because sometimes people use spiritual in different contexts, and sometimes it relates to certain religions or certain aspects of religions, and so I always like to clarify that. But I would certainly say that Bitcoin has contributed to my spiritual journey and is a part of my spiritual path, to whatever capacity. I don't know exactly what percentage that represents on it, but it's certainly on there, and it's definitely in a positive way. That much is for sure.
Yeah, and that comes back to, because now I can store my energy in a sound money that, yeah, now we get into the value going up again. but it has allowed me to have more time because I did store my energy in Bitcoin rather than in the fiat system.
And an interesting perspective on that is it's not so much that the value of Bitcoin is going up compared to fiat. What if the value of fiat is going down compared to Bitcoin? What if we flip that narrative over for a second? Does that change things for people that are listening or for you? It changes things for me. And so holding Bitcoin is essentially preparing ourselves for when fiat essentially self-destructs. Then we're not left with nothing. We're left with the superior alternative.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Everything falls when priced in Bitcoin. So tell me a little bit about your mental health activist and how did you get into that?
Yeah, so I ran a mental health podcast during COVID. I had about 48 episodes and did that for a couple of years and interviewed some amazing people, gold medal athletes from the Olympics and TV stars and famous comedians and sports, NHL Hall of Famers, military veterans, incredible people. And the show covered this story arc it was called From Rock Bottom to Rockin' It. And the idea was to explore the deepest, darkest moments of people who had attempted suicide and survived, or were completely overdosed on drugs for a decade and lost everything, including their shoes, and then came back, and then came back greater than they ever had been before. It's that story arc of rock bottom moments to just crushing it in life. And that was important to me because when I was a kid, when I quit school and left home, at the age of 15, I got into a lot of trouble. I had a lot of mental health issues, and maybe I still have some today, but back then they threatened to end my life or to steer it in a direction that there was almost no recovery. Right. Back then, my crowd back then, there was a lot of fights, a bunch of them went to jail, some of them didn't make it. It's very, sad, but true. And that's the reality of living a tough life when you're into the drug scene or you've left the system and have nowhere to go and you don't know what to do next. You just know you don't want to be here, but you don't know what to do next. And so I ended up with a group of people who I loved dearly and still do. I haven't talked to them obviously since then, but they helped me feel comfortable in my own skin, and they helped me feel welcome, which was things that I had never experienced in the traditional school system. I just felt oppressed and suppressed and belittled, and I was self-destructing in that system. So, but of course, what comes with the drug world as well is everything that's negative about it too. And so there were all those other things, and I had to go through my own journey to rewire my own brain in a way that would allow that new sense of stable self to continue thriving back into the traditional world outside of the drug and violence sort of environment. And that was a personal mental health journey that, like I said, could have consumed me, but I made it through. And to me, there's three different when mental health strikes its hardest, when someone snaps, when someone's mental health breaks down completely, I feel that there's basically three categories of things that generally happen. Either there's harm to others, so they become violent and maybe they hurt or they kill someone or they just become out of control. The second one is if they don't have an inkling to harm others, which I didn't. There's self-harm, and the most extreme example of that would be, let's say, suicide. And I didn't have a self-harm inclining either, but people on my show did, so we talk about that. And the third thing, if it's not harm to others or harm to self, the third aspect that I think happens when mental health reaches a tipping point is avoidance. I just don't want to be a part of it. I want to hide. I need to disappear. And that's where I was. I wanted to just escape. And that's where drug addiction can come into play. That's where, then that leads, of course, to, overdosing or to withdrawing from society to the degree where you're no longer functional. And that can mean losing your family, losing your company, losing your self-identity, and ultimately, accidentally, usually losing your life as well, eventually, or ending up in jail and et cetera. So those are the three types of mental health branches that I explore on the show. And it's really important to me to be able to give back to people. And the purpose of the show, other than to have these wonderful conversations, was to see if I could find some common roots between how did 48 different amazing people get through their mental health crisis, recover from overdose. One gentleman, amazing guy, Kevin Hines, he jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge and was one of the 50, whatever number it is, survivors out of 2,000 jump attempts. And, his story really struck with me. He said that, mental health is not something that we really heal from completely ever, really. It's just something that we learn to live with and to become productive in spite of and to become stronger than. But we can only do that if we understand ourselves better and if we establish a strong sense of identity and surround ourselves with people that really support us. And so I wanted to share these little golden nuggets with people that, in the middle of COVID, that lockdown, that were struggling. And in many ways, you can say that the Bitcoin community and people that are connected by Bitcoin ideology, we are all supporting each other and we are giving each other a little bit of that hope and that foundation that we can grow together with. But yeah, that's the mental health show. And that's a little story of why it's important to me and how I got into it.
Well, it sounds absolutely fascinating. I'm definitely going to go check it out. I've always been fascinated by people who do extreme things like climb Mount Everest or, climb like Alex Honnold, because that's putting your life in danger. And yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But that does fascinate me, what you just shared about. And did you find Bitcoin right after that, or had you already found Bitcoin?
So I discovered Bitcoin in 2017. That's when I took it seriously. I had two friends that tried to explain it to me in, I don't know, 2014, 15, 16. And I would say that I wasn't ready to hear it then, but I prefer to just say they did a really shitty job at explaining it. They did a horrible, horrible job at explaining Bitcoin. And it's no wonder that I didn't give them, the attention that they needed. So I blame them. They, you know who you are. No, so I discovered Bitcoin in 2017 and the mental health show started in 2020. So that was a few years after.
Okay. Well, your journey is fascinating. I see you going so far in the Bitcoin world. Is there anything you want to just leave with people? Do you want to tell people about Public Board or the conference you just attended?
I own a big, massive billboard at the side of a highway. It's like the world's first crowdsourced billboard, and anyone can put stuff on it. But I don't know. I'll go into that if you'd like. But that's really the nutshell. It's just a massive billboard, and anyone can have fun on it. So we're exploring. We raised some investor capital from some amazing investors in Silicon Valley and out in Austin, Texas, and that's allowed us to purchase. It's like a 7,000 pound, 48-foot giant billboard, and we're trying to just, you could say, decentralize it or democratize it or just let everyone have access to a medium of communication that they never had access to before. And that really changes how that industry works. So that's my, you could say, my day job, and where I put like most of my focus right now. And other than that, though, the comic is here, and every time someone buys a copy or sponsors a product placement in it or just donates and contributes to it, it doesn't like go to my pocket. So say this isn't the end goal, right? The end goal is to produce a proper TV show that either hits either it goes to the big screen or becomes a TV show on Amazon, Netflix, and that's where the money goes. So when people donate or buy or sponsor or whatever it is, or contribute to the story or give me a character idea, all that kind of stuff builds towards the first TV show as a true Bitcoiner mainstream production that the world can enjoy. And that's where I think I'll be able to affect the greatest change and support the community the best. And that's what I hope to be my greatest contribution, is to bring that to mainstream and let an audience of tens of millions of people in dozens of languages sit down with their children and enjoy the Bitcoiner TV show that is a lot of fun to engage with. So I'd love it if people reached out to me and asked me questions. At coinlords.com, they have the link tree there. I also have my AI clone set up there. You can talk to my AI clone and ask it any question you want, and it'll get in touch with me too. And I really want to just include everyone listening to whatever degree, just include everyone on the journey. So it's coinlords.com to reach me, and you'll find the X profile there. And so I'm going to add the Noster very, very soon. And any support or ideas or conversations, I'm wide open to, and I appreciate all of it.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Eric. This was a lot of fun.
Follow as well. It's great chatting with you, and we'll see you all at the next conference.